everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Nikki, and today's video I'm sharing 20 quick and easy healthy dinner recipes that I have made throughout my weight loss journey. Some of them I make multiple times a month or every week, and they're just simple meal ideas that have really helped me to stay on track. So I got this idea, actually, Jen Chapin. If you guys don't follow her, check out her channel. I will link it in the description. She's got some awesome ideas on there and just really inspiring with her journey and all that she does. So check her page out, but I got the idea to repurpose some old content that I had filmed because I always get questions when I post my grocery hauls and stuff for all the different meals that I talk about, how to actually make them. So I thought having them all in one place would be really nice, and I thought I would start by trying it out this way. So I'm gonna be sharing 20 different dinners that I have made in my What I Eat in a Day videos. I just edited out the dinners from the videos and put them all together in this video today, and I recorded new voiceovers with them talking through how I make each recipe. There will be timestamps to each one if you want to just scroll through, even if you just need some meal inspiration. I honestly wanted to do this for myself too because I've really been struggling in the kitchen. I've just been lacking motivation to really make meals. It does get to the point where I really am just throwing things together, and it's like a lot of the recipes in this video, but these are just some of the ways that I really stay on track. Some really quick and easy meal ideas using different proteins and veggies, and there are a lot of pasta recipes because you guys know I love pasta. There will be timestamps if you want to skip ahead to any of the recipes. It's going to be a long video, but I hope you guys find it helpful, maybe get some inspiration for some new meal ideas, or just a reminder of some meals that maybe you want to start having again. So if you enjoy this video or find it helpful, please go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let's get started with the first dinner. Today we're starting with some fried rice. So in a big pan, I start heating up some toasted sesame oil, and then I dice up half of an onion and add some minced garlic. I let that cook for a few minutes, and then I add a bag of frozen veggies. So I've got some carrots, corn, green beans, and peas. And I just continue to cook those until they're fully cooked through. I'm also making a Trader Joe's chicken mushroom freezer meal that will go with this, so I just have that cooking in a separate pan. So once the veggies are no longer frozen, I add in the pack of riced hearts of palm. This is 0 points on WeightWatchers and helps to add some fiber and bulk the meal up. And then I always like to add some type of regular rice. Today I'm using jasmine rice, which is always my favorite just for the flavor and texture. But if I have some prepped in the fridge, I'll usually just scoop some of that into here. But I also like to use the freezer bags from Trader Joe's. They're super convenient because they've got 2 cups of rice, and I can just pop it in the microwave for 3 minutes to cook it, and then I add it to this fried rice as I'm making it. Whenever I make these freezer meals from Trader Joe's, like this mushroom chicken, I like to let it cook through and then use some kitchen scissors to cut it up into smaller pieces. And then once the chicken is cooked fully through, I add in the veggie mix, and sometimes I even cut that up into smaller pieces as well. Both Adam and I agree that our favorite part of the fried rice is the scrambled eggs, so I crack some eggs in a separate bowl and scramble them together, and then in the fried rice pan, I make a hole in the center. I spray it with a little nonstick spray, and then I add the egg in, and then I just kind of cook it in the middle like you can see. I add some salt and pepper, and then once it's fully cooked through, I mix it in with the rice. And at this point, I also add in some soy sauce to the rice. I mix it together, and it helps to really add some good flavor. And I like to let this continue cooking for a few minutes because it starts to get kind of brown and a little bit crispy in some areas, and it almost reminds me of hibachi at a restaurant. And usually I get 4 servings out of this batch here, and each serving, the only thing I really have to track is the jasmine rice that I used, which is 3 points, and then if I track the toasted sesame oil I used to start. And whenever we make this specific chicken, mushroom, green bean Trader Joe's meal, Adam and I split the bag, and it is a 5-point serving for half of the bag. Okay, the next recipe I wanted to share is one where I do something similar by bulking up the rice, but this is where I'm using the riced cauliflower and riced sweet potato veggie mix that I get in the freezer section. So next up, we are making a Spanish rice that again is bulked up in lower points, and with this today I'm going to be having some shrimp ceviche on some corn tortillas. But to get started with the Spanish rice, I've got a skillet cooking with some nonstick spray. I added the pack of the riced cauliflower and sweet potato mix, and then some garlic. After I've let it cook for a little bit, I add a can of diced tomatoes, and sometimes I'll use diced tomatoes with chilies if I have them, but I just had some diced tomatoes and a can of whole corn. Then I'm adding some dried minced onion as well as some taco seasoning, and the one I'm using today is just Taco Tuesday from Flavor God. Once I've let it cook a little bit longer, this is when I add the regular rice in. So just like I did with the fried rice, I'm adding some pre-cooked jasmine rice, and I'm just measuring it out with a scoop today. Sometimes I use my food scale, but I add about 1.5 cups of pre-cooked rice. And when I say pre-cooked, I just prep it ahead of time earlier in the week in big batches in my rice cooker. But while this rice is cooking, I also add some enchilada sauce. And the enchilada sauce I use is just from Trader Joe's. It's a nice low point option that adds some good flavor. I find it super convenient to use my griddle to heat up tortillas for tacos like this, so I just spray them with some nonstick spray and start heating them up on medium-low heat. Also, so weird to see that we still have our carpet. This was when we had first moved in and we had carpet in our kitchen. Anyway, though, I just keep an eye on the tortillas until they are heated up. Once they are, I add the ceviche that we got from Sam's Club. It's just shrimp, cucumber, tomato, jalapeno, onion, and it's so refreshing and good on these tortillas, and it pairs perfectly with the side of Spanish rice. And the only things I really have to track for this meal are the serving of Spanish rice. It's just the jasmine rice for 3 points, and then the tortillas that I used. Moving on, we are making another one of my favorite cookbook recipes, and this is a big batch of chili. Most of the time in the past when I've made this chili, I've used 99% lean ground turkey because it's 0 points on WeightWatchers, but now that they've added a lot more lean meats, you can use any of those, whether it's lean ground beef, ground chicken, or even a less lean version of the turkey that isn't 0 points now. So I have a big pot on the stove that I just set to medium heat, and I spray that with some nonstick spray while I start cooking up the ground turkey. And while that's cooking, I start to get the veggies ready, so I dice up a jalapeno and a red bell pepper. And you can use any color bell pepper, I just prefer to use red for the flavor. I also chop up an onion, and again, you could use whatever type of onion you have on hand. I'm just using a yellow onion today. One thing I really love about this chili is that it just makes such a big batch. So there have been times in the past where I freeze the leftovers and then I just have them ready to make a meal out of from the freezer, or I just put them into different serving containers and then I use them throughout the week for so many different meals. And just a few ideas of what I use that leftover chili for. One of my favorite things to do is chili mac. So I just do a base of mac and cheese, whether it's homemade or like a box mac and cheese. It's so good with the chili on top and extra filling. I also like to use it as a topping on nachos. It's also nice to use to make chili dogs, and then sometimes I like to just make a loaded bowl of chili where I add some different maybe chips, some sour cream, some chives, just different toppings on top of the chili to make it extra flavorful. But once the meat is fully cooked through, I just use my meat masher and smash it into tinier pieces. Then I add in the veggies and just start cooking those at the medium heat. And once I've cooked the meat and the veggies for a little bit, I add in 2 packets of chili seasoning and I just mix that together until everything's coated. After the seasoning is in, then I add a carton of chicken broth. You can also do chicken bone broth, which would add more protein, and I don't even think it affects the points for the recipe. But I just continue to let that cook over medium heat for a few minutes while I get some cans open. So I have a can of tomato sauce, diced tomatoes, a can of diced tomatoes with green chilies. Then I also add a can of pinto beans, kidney beans, black beans, and whole kernel corn. Then that's the last of the ingredients that I add to the chili, and usually I will just put the lid on and simmer it for as long as I need to. So a lot of the times I'll make a sandwich on the side or something. Today that's what we're doing because I was really craving soup and sandwich combo. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover this with a lid and let it simmer while I make our sandwiches. For the sandwich that I'm making with my chili today, I'm using some sourdough bread from the market, and I really like buying the loaf because I can slice it myself, and I made some really thin slices today that I usually just weigh out on my food scale to see how many points the serving will be. And once I've cut the slices, I start making the sandwich. So I used some of the Coop's spicy mustard. I just use a little bit because it does have a kick to it. And then I'm using some chicken lunch meat, which is 0 points on WeightWatchers now. I usually use whatever type of lettuce we have on hand, whether it's romaine, shredded lettuce, or spinach, and today it was shredded. I also used a slice of reduced fat cheddar for 3 points on WeightWatchers. And while I've been making my sandwich, the chili has just been simmering, which just helps to give it more flavor, but it is done once it's heated up through, and I add some light sour cream to top it off. Next up, I'm going to be making a cheesy pasta that I add some chicken brats to, and I always like to bulk up pasta dishes with some type of veggies, so today I'm using this yellow squash. You can definitely peel the squash if you prefer, but I just like to leave the skin on usually, so I'm just dicing it up into smaller cubes while I've got some water boiling for pasta. The chicken sausage that I'm using for this dish today is actually a buffalo chicken bratwurst, and Adam and I are each going to have a link and a half for 6 points total. So I just used a small pan with some nonstick spray and started cooking those. And then actually in a separate small pan, I sprayed it with some nonstick spray and cooked up that zucchini with some garlic and herb seasoning until it was softer to the touch and just cooked through for the pasta. I do prefer to use the fat-free Fairlife milk now, but this one I'm using some cashew milk, which is the same amount of points, just a little bit less protein. But I pour the milk in this cup and pop it in the microwave to heat it up. Then I'm mixing in some powdered cheese that I had just gotten from Sam's Club, as well as some minced garlic and buffalo sauce. I decided last minute to make this more of a buffalo cheesy mac and cheese because of the chicken sausage. And once the water was boiling, I added the pasta in. I usually do 3 ounces of dry pasta per portion when that's the whole meal. So that's a 6-point serving, and that's what I've got here. There's 2 servings. Once the pasta was cooked, I added in the cooked zucchini, and then the sauce. I just made sure to cover the noodles with it. I also added some extra salt, pepper, and some seasonings, just some garlic salt. And I just divided the pasta into 2 even portions using my food scale, and then I topped it with the cooked bratwurst and a little drizzle of some buffalo sauce to top it off. And I just used the Kinder's brand buffalo sauce for the drizzle on top, but you can use whatever one you prefer. Same with the chicken sausage. If you have a lower point option you want to use, I always mix up which type of chicken sausage I incorporate with this dish. The next meal I'm making is a 2-ingredient dough barbecue chicken pizza. I don't always do this, but for today's, I only used whole wheat flour. Sometimes I like to do a blend of all-purpose and whole wheat flour, but I do 1 1/3 cup of that, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, some different seasonings, which I used some garlic and herb seasoning today, and then 1 cup of plain non-fat Greek yogurt. Whenever I switch it up though and use whole wheat flour for the 2-ingredient dough, I do end up having to add a little bit more Greek yogurt. But I usually know when I have to do that once I start mixing it. So I like to put some gloves on like this and then just mix the dough together with my hands. You can see I didn't put enough Greek yogurt, so I had Adam give me another scoop, and then I'm just incorporating that to continue mixing it until it actually forms a dough like this. Once the dough is formed, I use my food scale to just weigh out equal portions, and sometimes I'll do like a double batch of this dough so that I can make extra pitas and stuff, but usually I'll divide it into either 2 or 4 servings depending on how many portions I made. So I measure that out, and then I'm just using this mini roller, which this is actually a fondant roller. I had an extra one that has become my kitchen roller, and it works perfect for this dough. So I'm just rolling it out, and I did add a little extra flour so that it wouldn't stick to the counter, but that is going to be my base for my pizza. I do like to par bake my dough ahead of time, so I just pop it in the oven that has been preheating to 400 degrees, and I let that bake for about 10 minutes while I get all the toppings prepped. For the toppings on this one today, I've got some Members Mark pulled chicken, which is actually now 0 points on WeightWatchers. I just mixed that with some Sweet Baby Ray's no sugar added barbecue sauce. So once the chicken's coated, I add it to the dough that has been baking for 10 minutes. You can see it's starting to cook up a little bit, but it's not fully baked. So I add the chicken on top of it. I've also got a serving of light mozzarella cheese from Trader Joe's, which is 2 points. One of my favorite combinations is red onion with barbecue chicken, so I always make sure to include some diced red onion. And then I've really been enjoying crispy onions as well, so I decided to just add a point worth of those on top of the pizza. And usually I just buy whatever brand I can find for the crispy onions, but these ones specifically were Kinder's. They're like their salt and pepper ones, and they add such good flavor to the pizza. I also always like to add a drizzle of barbecue sauce before I put it back in to bake because I like how it kind of gets a little bit caramelized when it's baking. So I get the toppings on, I pop it back in the oven, and I let it bake for another maybe 20 minutes or so, just checking on it every 5 minutes and rotating it. And you can definitely experiment with 2-ingredient dough and the different flours that you use. When I use the whole wheat flour only, it definitely comes out as more of like a cracker texture and even kind of flavor, but I really enjoy it, especially with the barbecue chicken. So I just keep that in mind. Sometimes I like to use just all-purpose flour, sometimes I do a mix, and sometimes I just do the whole wheat flour. And for this recipe, I just had to track the points for the flour and the 2-ingredient dough. I also had to track 2 points for the light mozzarella, 1 for the crispy onion, and then it shows up that I tracked the chicken, but this was before it was 0 points on WeightWatchers. Okay, this next one is one of my all-time favorite meals because I crave this restaurant, Naf Naf, all the time. They make Mediterranean-style food, so they've got some falafel, couscous, lots of really flavorful different ingredients to make bowls, and I crave it all the time. So this is kind of like a copycat version of that at home. I didn't have any veggie mix prepped at the time, so that's what I'm cooking up here. I've got some zucchini, some bell pepper. I sprayed it with some nonstick spray beforehand, and I'm just cooking that up. And I also added some garlic parmesan seasoning to it. And while those veggies cook on the stove, I start heating up the couscous, which I always just microwave it. I find that this is the easiest way to make it. So I use the Trader Joe's couscous with some chicken broth. This is another example where you could use chicken bone broth to make it higher in protein, but I pop that in the microwave and start cooking it in intervals while I'm also air frying some other toppings for the bowl. So most important for this, I've got some falafel from Trader Joe's. It's just in their freezer section and you can just pop it in the air fryer to heat it up. Then for my protein, I made some Tyson blackened chicken, which is 0 points on WeightWatchers. It definitely has a kick to it, but I feel like it adds the perfect spice to this bowl. So I'm just heating that up in the air fryer as well with the falafel. Then while I'm cooking the couscous, I just continue to mix it up and heat it in intervals. Like I said, if it seems like it doesn't have enough liquid, I add a little bit of water to it to make it a little bit more fluffy, and then I pop it back in. And I also added some garlic, salt, and pepper to the couscous while it was cooking. And once it was done, I portioned a serving out to use as the base of my bowl. So that's what I have here. And then I added a good amount of the veggie mix that I made. The blackened chicken was also done in the air fryer, and I love using my kitchen scissors to just cut it up into smaller pieces. And then for the falafel, I also crumble it up into smaller pieces. So I've got those on there. And then I also diced up some dill pickle, which adds a nice refreshing crunch to this. Cucumber is also really good, but I didn't have any. So the pickle works perfectly. Then usually I like to add hummus, but I also didn't have any of that. So I made a quick and easy sour cream dip using some light sour cream and spinach. And I just threw that together as like a little tzatziki sauce in the center. So usually I prefer hummus, but this worked just as well. This next meal that I'm making made great portion sizes, and it just used up some ingredients I had on hand. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I kind of just threw it together with what I had. So in a pan, I sprayed it with some nonstick spray, and I'm cooking a pound of 99% lean ground turkey. Again, you could use any meat that you have on hand. Ground chicken would work really well for this as well, but I'm just cooking that up while I boil some water for pasta. And while those things are cooking on the stove, I'm just chopping up the veggies. So I had a red bell pepper and some jalapenos that I needed to use up. And I'm just dicing the veggies up into smaller pieces that I'm going to add to the chicken once it's cooked. But I just kind of flatten it out and flip it over like you can see. And then I do use a meat masher to make sure that it's smaller chunks once it's cooked through. I feel like a lot of the times people say they don't like to use ground chicken and ground turkey because it is more on the drier side than meats that aren't as lean. And I feel like the meat masher definitely helps to make it just like more broken down crumbles and just less dry of a texture. At least that's how it is for me. And that's why I always prefer to do this. So this tool is one of the best kitchen tools I've ever purchased. I use it all the time. I just always make sure to use it once the meat has cooked a little because when it's raw, it kind of just sticks to it. Then once the meat is fully cooked through, I add in the chopped jalapeno, the red bell pepper, and then also a can of diced tomatoes that I strained. And I'm making 4 servings today for this meal, so I just made the entire box of pasta, and once the water started boiling, I added that in. I'm also adding some skim ricotta cheese to the tomato chicken veggie mixture. I let that cook together for a few minutes while the pasta's cooking, and then once the pasta's done, I strain most of it. I save a little bit of pasta water that I mix in with the chicken and ricotta, and then I scoop the pasta in as well. After I did this, I just mixed everything together and put it in a glass baking dish that I sprayed with some nonstick cooking spray. I topped the pasta with some light mozzarella cheese, and then I popped it in the oven to bake for about 20 minutes at 350 degrees. I'm getting really excited about grilling season coming up, and these kebabs are one of my favorite things to make because they're pretty simple, especially if I remember to marinate them ahead of time. So I choose which veggies I'm going to use, and today I just decided on some bell pepper and zucchini. And actually, both things are fresh from our garden, which I swear taste so much better. But I usually marinate them for as long as I can remember ahead of time. I will put them in a bowl with some nonstick spray, or if I've got some extra points to use, a lot of the times I will use some olive oil. But a lot of the times I like to use the olive oil with the meat. And then I'll just use the nonstick spray on the veggies. But anyway, I went ahead and did this ahead of time where I put all of the chicken, I'm just using chicken breast, and I cut it up into smaller pieces. I put it in a bag with a marinade packet, which today I'm using a garlic and white wine marinade, as well as a little bit of olive oil and some water. And I actually did the exact same thing with some steak that I just cut into smaller pieces, and I had let it marinate in the fridge as well. Another tip that I've learned with skewers is to soak them ahead of time so that they don't burn as much on the grill. I've had some times where they still burn after I do this, but it is something that I try to do if I can remember. So I did soak my skewers. I made them all up just separate with the chicken breast and the steak. I just feel like it's easier to cook them evenly that way. And then my veggies, which I, like I said, sprayed with some nonstick spray. I tossed them in a bag with some different seasonings, and I let those sit in the fridge as well until I made the skewers. And Maggie's always happy when we're out grilling. She likes to be my little helper, but I've had the grill heating up while I was working on getting the skewers made so that it was already preheated when I started cooking everything. So I just brought everything out. I'm still working on my grilling skills, but this is how I set it up. The serving of steak I used was technically 4 points. I also used a Trader Joe's rice medley, which is just a frozen bag. They have like the jasmine rice. That was the perfect side for this, and I did track some olive oil for the marinades. Whenever I'm craving a classic slice of pizza, but really don't want to get takeout pizza because it just never makes me feel the best, this is my go-to recipe for just like a classic pepperoni pizza. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, I do like to do a blend of whole wheat and all-purpose flour, so that's what I'm doing here. And because I'm making a double batch, I just do 1 1/3 cup of each type of flour. Then I do 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 cups of plain non-fat Greek yogurt, and then some different seasonings. But like I said, this is a double batch, so that's why I'm using more yogurt and stuff. Again, I just like to put on gloves whenever I make dough because I like to use my hands to make it, and I find it's just much easier this way. I always get questions about what gloves I use, and because I run a cookie business, I always order a bunch of them in bulk, but I've always ordered them off Webstaurant. I can try to link them. I think the same ones are also available on Amazon, so I'll try to link those in the description, but having gloves in the kitchen is so nice. It makes it so much easier to make ingredients and recipes like 2-ingredient dough. But again, like I did before, I just use my hand until it forms a dough. Because I used the whole wheat flour, I had to use some extra yogurt as well, as you could see. But then again, I use my food scale to weigh out even portions. Because I made extra, I can do some pitas that I just bake and have ready in the fridge for the week to make a bunch of different recipes with. Honestly, we just go in phases when it comes to the type of pizza we have with the 2-ingredient dough, because if you guys have been following me for a little, you know I really like pizza bakes, and I have these glass baking dishes from IKEA that make the perfect individual bake pizzas for us. So I usually use those, but a lot of the times too, I crave the thinner crust and just it not as doughy. And that's when I make this style pizza where I actually roll it out and make like more of a flattened style. And that's usually when I'm craving restaurant style thin crust. So this always helps to satisfy that craving. And I do the same thing with pizza bakes, but I always like to par bake the dough ahead of time. Sometimes I'll do the bakes a little bit longer first, but when I put the flat crust like this in the oven, I usually just bake it at 400 degrees for 10 minutes. One thing lately that I've also noticed has made it taste just a little bit more like restaurant style pizza is using tomato paste instead of the tomato sauce. I think it just has a deeper flavor and texture. So what I do is I just take a can and I add some water and different seasonings to it. I also add some minced garlic, and when I want to give it a little kick, I'll add some crushed red pepper like I just did, and I just mix it until it's fully blended. Then once the crusts have par baked, I usually do like to flip them. I was kind of struggling here, but I flip them over and then I'll add the sauce on top. Neither of us really like much sauce, but it works well with this tomato paste because it's kind of thicker that the crust is already hot, so I spoon it on and then just kind of spread it out to cover the entire crust. I'm also making Trevor a pizza, so that's why I've got a third in the background, and then you can see I've got the other 2 extra pitas that usually those bake a little bit faster than the pizzas do, so I have to take them out earlier, but when I make those, I can use them for tuna pitas, lunch meat, even quick pizza bakes throughout the week if I want to just top them with some sauce, turkey, pepperoni, and cheese. They're just a really nice ingredient to have prepped and ready in the fridge, and especially when I'm already making the dough, it's just convenient to already make them and make a double batch. Then when it comes to classic pizza toppings for me, I really like to include some veggies, especially green pepper and onion. I also really like mushroom on my pizza, but we didn't have that today, so I used a good amount of green pepper and onion that I had chopped up, as well as some turkey pepperoni and then some light mozzarella cheese. I also had some light Mexican blend cheese, and when I can do a variety, I kind of like to do that on the pizzas as well. So I did about a point of that and then some of the light mozzarella as well. And I personally like to put the pepperoni on top because then it gets a little bit extra crispier. So I top the pizzas with the pepperoni, pop them back in the oven, usually for about 20 minutes at 400, and then they are perfectly done. I usually check to make sure that the bottom of the crust is nice and brown. Then I'm also making Trevor's pizza, which is just cheese and turkey pepperoni. Okay, this next meal is another one that was just something I needed to throw together quick and easy with what I had on hand. I always try to base meals around a vegetable, then a protein, and usually 0-point options if I have them. So I had some asparagus that I needed to use up, and I just chopped it, added it to a pan with some nonstick olive oil spray, and covered it so it could start cooking. I'm also making pasta, so I've got my water that already started boiling, and I add in the 3-ounce serving for each portion, which is 6 ounces total, and each serving is 6 points on WeightWatchers. While the asparagus is cooking, I did season it with some onion powder, garlic salt, salt and pepper. And I realized I actually had way too much asparagus for the servings that I was making because I'm just doing 2 portions with this meal. So I took about half of it out and I'll just use that for different meals throughout the week. But to the asparagus I'm going to be using, I added some shredded cooked chicken breast I had in the fridge. And this chicken's actually from a local meal prep service, but it's just plain shredded chicken breast. So 0 points for that. The asparagus is 0 points. And then my pasta I have cooking, I'm adding a sauce to. So the sauce that I'm using today is the brand La Terrafina, and it's their spinach parmesan Greek yogurt dip. It works so well as a pasta sauce. And then I had some grated parmesan too, so I put a little bit of that in there as well to add some extra cheesiness. And that was pretty much it. This meal came together so quickly, but it was nice to just use up the ingredients I had on hand. So I mix in the shredded chicken breast and asparagus, and that's pretty much it. What's nice about this is you really can get creative with what you use and the flavors will work well together. I could have used spinach or pepper or even zucchini as my veggie with the spinach parmesan dip. It works nicely with the pasta, and then even the chicken I could have switched out with a grilled chicken or maybe even some ground turkey meat or something. For this recipe, I'm starting out by making that Spanish rice that I made earlier in this video. I start with the riced sweet potato and cauliflower veggies, as well as a little bit of garlic and some nonstick olive oil spray. But for this recipe, I'm going to be making some chicken enchilada style burrito bakes that I'm going to pop in the oven. So I'm starting with some chicken breast that's going to be the filling of these wraps. I just chop it up with some kitchen scissors. I spray the pan with some nonstick spray, and I'm just going to cook it until it's fully done. To the chicken cooking, I add some salt and pepper, and then I'm also working on the Spanish rice next to it. So I add in the pinto beans, some tomatoes, some corn, and I mix that all together with some enchilada sauce, some different seasoning like garlic and onion powder, and some garlic and herb seasoning that I mix in. I also add in the jasmine rice. And I'm just using one of the Trader Joe's frozen bags of it. So once it's done cooking in the microwave, I can mix it into all of these ingredients. And then that's pretty much it for the base of what I'm going to be making today. And once the chicken breast is done cooking on the stove, I just want to shred it in the easiest way possible, which is using my KitchenAid mixer. So I do let it cool for a minute or two, and then I just put the beating attachment on and do it until the chicken is perfectly shredded. So while I'm doing that, I also added in some taco seasoning to it to make it taco seasoned. I'm putting in some light Laughing Cows that'll make it nice and creamy, and then I already had veggie mix in the fridge, so I just had to scoop that in and mix it with the chicken and cheese. The tortillas that I'm going to be using for this today are La Banderita carb counter tortillas, so they're actually higher in fiber, which makes them a lot more filling. But I just lay them out and then evenly divide that creamy chicken mixture that I have. I roll the wraps up tightly, and then each bake is going to get 2 of them. So I already put a serving of the Spanish rice on the bottom of the glass baking dishes I'm going to be using. And the glass baking dishes I'm using are just from IKEA. They work so nicely for pizza bakes, but also I love to use them for these individual enchilada bakes as well. I just really like that they're nice individual sizes, and it's easy to just kind of do better portion control with them. And you can even prep ahead with these dishes because they do come with lids. Anyway, though, once I have the tortillas wrapped up, I top each with some enchilada sauce. This is just the same one I used earlier, and in the Spanish rice, it's the Trader Joe's enchilada sauce. And then I just sprinkle each one with some reduced fat mozzarella shredded cheese, and I pop them in the oven at 350 for 15 to 20 minutes. Each wrap has 1 light Laughing Cow, so it's 2 points for those. I topped it with 1 point of the light mozzarella, 1 point of the sauce, and then the rice is 3 points, and the tortillas are 3 as well, making this entire dish 10 points. Okay, I joke about it all the time, but I could eat pasta for every single meal, and this is another one of those pasta dishes that helps me to stay on track with my weight loss journey, but still be able to incorporate it all the time. So, here I'm just explaining the veggies that I have roasted as a side with the meat sauce that I'm going to be making today. I just chopped up some asparagus, red onion, and mushrooms, sprayed it with some nonstick olive oil spray, and added some seasoning to it. And that's what I just popped in the oven while I was working on the pasta. So that's in there baking right now. And in a pan here, I've got some nonstick spray that I sprayed. Today I'm making the meat sauce with ground chicken, but like I say for many of these recipes, you could really use any meat you want, and especially now that there are more options on Weight Watchers for 0 points. Feel free to mix it up when it comes to this meat sauce. So I had the meat cooking with a half of an onion, and I just combined it once the meat was fully cooked. I poured in a can of tomato sauce from Trader Joe's, and then I'm just adding some grated Parmesan and different Italian seasonings that I have, some oregano, basil, and then a different Italian blend. And that's pretty much it for the sauce. I add some salt and pepper, and I just let it continue to simmer while the pasta's cooking and the veggies are roasting in the oven. Today I was specifically craving spaghetti, so I made the Barilla Protein Plus Thin Spaghetti. It's 6 points for the serving of 3 ounces dry. I just made 6 ounces total dry and divide it once it's cooked. But I put the serving of pasta, topped it with a good amount of meat sauce, which it actually shows as higher points on here because this was before meats were 0. And then I have a nice serving of veggies. So this is a super filling meal that really doesn't take much time to throw together at all. For this next recipe, I'm making some tuna cakes with flavored jasmine rice. So it's kind of like a rice pilaf that I'm starting with some olive oil. Into the olive oil, I add some diced onion, diced jalapeno, garlic, salt, and pepper, and I let that cook up. I just continue to stir that while I start to get the stuff for the tuna cakes ready. So for the tuna cakes, I like to use tuna in water. For this recipe, I'm going to be making 4 tuna cakes, and I use 3 cans of tuna. So I add that to a bowl strained out, and I'm trying to get some of the extra liquid out as well. Really quickly switching back to the rice though, the onion and pepper are done. So I add in a cup of jasmine rice and mix that around to get it coated in the veggies and oil. I stir that around, cooking it for a few minutes, and then add in 2 cups of chicken broth. I just cover this and let it continue to cook on low heat while I make the tuna cakes. So I'm adding 2 eggs to those, as well as half a cup of panko breadcrumbs, 2 tablespoons of diced chives, which I actually just grabbed from my garden outside. I also add 2 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese, 2 tablespoons of light mayo, and a tablespoon of mustard. And I just used spicy brown mustard today. I also add some salt and pepper to the tuna cakes, and then I'm using my food scale to weigh out 4 even portions. And during this time, the rice has just been sitting covered on the stove, but I've been heating up my griddle here that I just sprayed with some nonstick spray and put the tuna cakes on. They don't have to be perfect, but I kind of like to flatten them out like thinner burgers because then I find that they get just a little bit more crispy, but I just continue to cook those until they've browned on each side. You can see the rice has started to brown as well, which is how I like it. I just mix it up like this and keep it covered until the tuna cakes are done. This next one is a similar pasta dish to the other ones I've made, but I wanted to include it to just show how much variety you can really have just using the ingredients you have on hand. So even if it's the same idea and even similar vegetables, today I'm using some red bell pepper. These are from the garden, as well as some asparagus. And I just chop those up and start cooking them in a pan with a little bit of garlic. I also made sure to start boiling water while I was doing this. I'm going to be making another pasta dish, but today I'm using some red lentil penne from Trader Joe's. Changing up a few ingredients like the type of pasta you use or even the protein definitely can make a difference. So I'm using a different protein as well. I've got these Belinsky chicken sausages. They're only 2 points per link, so we're having multiple because it helps to add a lot of protein and make these way more filling. And once the vegetables have cooked for a little bit, I add some extra seasonings. So I added some onion salt and garlic Parmesan seasoning, as well as a little bit of salt and pepper. I continue to let that cook, and then I mix in the chopped up chicken sausage, which is already fully cooked, but I like to fully heat it up as well. And today for the sauce, I was using some garlic chive butter that I actually made at home. So I whipped up some butter with some chives, some parmesan, and garlic, and that's pretty much all it is. Then I just put it in containers like this. I'm weighing out the portion that I'm going to be using. And then I just toss the noodles in the garlic butter because they're nice and hot. It melts perfectly and coats them. And then I can mix in the chicken sausage and veggies. This barbecue chicken flatbread is another one of those meals that I can throw together really quickly with the different ingredients I have on hand. I usually always have some type of chicken and barbecue sauce, and these lavash flatbreads have been so nice. So I mentioned before, but I love the combination of red onion with barbecue chicken, and that's why I'm dicing up some red onion that I'm going to put on top of this flatbread. I already went ahead and heated this chicken up, so it's just some Members Mark breaded chicken, and I've got 4 points worth here. I make sure not to overdo it because I'm going to be putting the flatbread in the oven, but I do cook the chicken so that it's no longer frozen and pretty much heated through, and then I'm just using kitchen scissors to cut it up. And this has actually been my favorite barbecue sauce lately. It is the Noble Made Less Sugar barbecue sauce. And I just toss the chicken in it to coat it because it gets a nice coating on the breading. 1 tablespoon is perfect, and it's actually 0 points for that serving. So once the chicken's coated, I just lay it out on the flatbread that I have on a baking sheet so I can pop it in the oven, which I just have the oven preheating to 375. And I usually don't do this. A lot of the times I'll just put the raw onion on and then bake it that way. But today I was craving more of like sauteed onions. So I went ahead and cooked those in the pan first. Since I made so many of them, I was just going to have leftovers. And it's just one of my favorite ingredients to add to different things. So I made a bigger batch and then I just put the sauteed onions directly onto the flatbread. Then using my food scale, I weighed out a 1 point serving of light mozzarella cheese and a 1 point serving of reduced fat shredded cheddar cheese. I've also been enjoying topping my pizzas and flatbreads with a little bit of garlic salt, especially the garlic salt with parsley from Aldi. So I sprinkle a little bit of that on top and then I just pop it in the oven for about 15 minutes. And then once it's done baking in the oven, I actually decided to top it with some pickles. So I just chop up some fresh pickles and put those on top for 0 points. Okay, out of all the meals that I'm making in this video, this one is making me so hungry right now. I might have to do this for dinner tonight. So these are 2-ingredient dough taco pizza bakes. I start by making some 2-ingredient dough. Today I just used regular all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, then some different seasoning, and I used this Tex-Mex seasoning I had that worked really well for the crust. I also put a cup of plain non-fat Greek yogurt. And just like before, I just mix it with my hands until it forms a dough. I always prefer to use the gloves like this. And today I'm doing a pizza bake. So I'm using those glass baking dishes that I got from IKEA. And I've honestly searched for a comparable dish on Amazon and just haven't found one. So I will link the IKEA dish, but the dimensions of it are 8¼ by 6 by 2¼ So they're the perfect size for an individual pizza bake. And once I made the dough, I just divided it into the even portions and I push it down into the glass container that I sprayed with some nonstick olive oil. Then once I have both portions evenly divided and pushed into the dish, I pop them in the oven that's been preheating at 400 and I let them bake for about 10 minutes. Then once the dough has par baked, I pull them back out of the oven and I start putting the toppings on. So today I'm using this queso cheese dip. I used 2 points of the cheese and I just spread it out evenly on each pizza crust. Then the other toppings I'm adding today, I chopped up some red onion, and then I had a can of diced tomatoes that I made sure to strain really well so that it didn't make the pizza too liquidy. I also had some ground chicken that I had made into taco meat earlier in the week using taco seasoning, and that's what I used as my protein on these pizzas. I used about 5 ounces of the meat to just add a little bit of extra protein, especially because now it's 0 points on Weight Watchers. And then I also topped it with just 1 point of reduced fat shredded cheese because I already did the queso as the sauce. I didn't want to do too much cheese, but I needed something on top. So that's it for this taco pizza bake, and it's 12 points total. The next dinner I'm going to be making is a salmon pasta, and this is always one of the most filling dinners that I make, and it's delicious. Like I mentioned before, I like to just prep some of these ingredients in bulk. So I was already just making the salmon. I had thawed the entire bag, and I just decided to make it all at once. I have the oven preheating to about 400. And each salmon fillet was individually wrapped, so I just took them out of their packaging and laid them out on this tray. I sprayed them with some nonstick olive oil, and then I'm topping them with some different seasonings. I usually mix up the different seasonings that I use for salmon. Today I'm just doing some garlic salt and garlic parmesan. And whenever I make this, I do one side and then I flip all the fillets over and do it again with the other side to make sure that they have enough seasoning on them. And then I just pop them in the oven to bake while I start making the pasta. So I do have some water boiling, but I pop the salmon in the oven at 400 degrees and I bake it for about 10 minutes and then flip them over and continue to bake for another 5 to 10 minutes. And similar to most of these recipes, I usually just use whatever vegetables I have on hand, and today that was a green bell pepper and some mushrooms. So I just diced those veggies up into smaller pieces, and then I have a pan on the stove that I'm heating up, and I spray it with some nonstick olive oil spray. Then I start cooking up the veggies. I also add a little bit of minced garlic to that as well, and I've got the water boiling that I'm going to cook the pasta in. And while I've been cooking the veggies, the salmon has been in the oven baking, so I just pull it out and flip them all over and pop it back in for another 5 minutes. Once the water is boiling for the pasta, I also just use my food scale to weigh out 6 ounces dry. I'm making 2 portions here, and I use 3 ounces dry for each portion for 6 points. I want to make a creamy sauce for this using some cheese and bone broth, so I heat up a cup of chicken bone broth and I add in 2 light Laughing Cow wedges and a slice of reduced fat mozzarella cheese. I made sure to whisk it together until it started to form a sauce, and it's still a little bit liquidy, but once I mix it together with the pasta and put it back on the stove and cook it, it thickens up a lot more and starts to attach to the noodles. So once I've mixed the cheese sauce in, I pour the veggies that I've cooked up in as well, and I just combine that to continue cooking for a few more minutes. Then the salmon is also done in the oven, and that makes this entire dish. So all I had to track was the mozzarella cheese, the Laughing Cow, and then the pasta. Okay, next up, we're making a dinner that I make probably the most, maybe top 3 out of all the recipes in this video, and that is a version of sesame noodles. And I say a version because just like so many of these recipes, I change up the ingredients that I use, but it's always just kind of the same basic recipe. So I start with some type of protein. Today I'm using ground turkey, which is 0 points on Weight Watchers. I heated up some toasted sesame oil, and then I started cooking the turkey with a little bit of minced garlic. And once the meat is fully cooked, then I start to add in some veggies. I should have used my meat masher for this one, but I didn't this time. And you can see the chunks are definitely a little bit bigger. But anyway, I had some jalapeno that I added for a little bit of spice today, as well as some snap peas. And then one of my all-time favorite ingredients to add to sesame noodles is just cabbage, or like a coleslaw cabbage mix like this that has carrots. So I added about half the bag and just started to cook that with the meat and some different seasonings. I really like this Kinder's Japanese barbecue seasoning, and then I also added a little bit of onion salt. I continue to let this cook for a little bit until the veggies are softened up, and I just keep them covered. I also decided I wanted to do some chicken wontons on the side, so I just like to cook those in a pan like this, and once they're done cooking, I pour some water in to steam them. And there's a bunch of different brands that have these mini wontons like this. There's even like a Trader Joe's option, but today I'm just using these ones. And then my favorite part of this dish, these are the Thai wheat noodles from Trader Joe's. I just break up 2 packages into the veggies and meat, and I mix them together with the noodles, and they start to soften up after a couple minutes. I also add some soy sauce, and sometimes I'll even do a splash of teriyaki sauce, but I didn't have any today, so the soy sauce worked perfectly fine. And I just continue to cook the wontons while the sesame noodles are just staying covered. They're not cooking right now, but I just keep them covered to let the noodles continue to soften up a little bit. Then all I track for this meal on WeightWatchers, I have the Bibigo wontons for 3 points. I track 1 point of toasted sesame oil and then 6 points for the Thai wheat noodles that I used. Okay, next up, we do have another pasta dish, but like I've mentioned many times on my channel, I never really get sick of pasta. And that's why I like to have low point meals to be able to incorporate it. So I've got some shrimp that I defrosted here and I'm just peeling the tails off. Shrimp is a 0 point food and it's high in protein, so that helps to make the meal a lot more filling. But I'm also going to be making some sauce for this dish today using a Trader Joe's spinach artichoke dip. It just comes in a frozen block like that, so I pop it in the microwave and I just heat it up in intervals. You can see it's starting to get a little bit warmer. And while I'm heating that up, I've got some pasta cooking and a pan that I heated up to cook the shrimp in. I always make sure to wait to start the shrimp until I've either started the pasta or it's done cooking just because it cooks so quickly, but I've got it in the pan with some nonstick spray. I added some roasted garlic and herb seasoning and some onion salt, and I just cook it for a few minutes until it's fully pink. And the pasta that I'm using is done cooking. So today I'm using the al dente noodles. They're a nice lower carb option that has more fiber and protein. And that helps to make them lower point on Weight Watchers. So once those are done, I just strain them and I'm adding the cooked dip to them and just mixing it all together. Because I'm just making 2 servings and not extra, I put that other dip to the side. I didn't use the entire thing because I only made enough pasta and shrimp for 2 servings. But the amount of dip I used was perfect to coat the noodles, so I did that. I mixed in the shrimp, and then I also had some salad on the side. Okay, we've got one more pasta dish that I wanted to include because I always get asked how I make mac and cheese, and it changes a lot, but this is pretty much the basic of how I do it. So I've already got my water boiling and I'm cooking the noodles that I'm going to be using. I really like to use zucchini with pasta because it bulks it up without really adding any extra flavor or texture. It kind of just mixes in well and makes the portion more filling. So I chopped up a zucchini and I'm just cooking it in a pan. I added a little bit of onion salt and some different seasonings while I cook that up and the pasta's cooking. I also forgot to mention that while I'm doing this, I've got some blackened chicken that's heating up in the air fryer, and then I started making the cheese sauce. So I heated up some Fairlife milk. I just use the fat-free milk because it helps to add a little extra protein, but it's only a point for 3/4 cup. To the heated up milk, I added a slice of reduced fat Swiss cheese, some shredded Mexican blend cheese, and then I had this chili cheese seasoning from Kinder's I wanted to try, and it worked really well. Once I've mixed the heated milk with the cheese, I whisk it together and then I pour it into the pasta and you can see it's nice and creamy, perfect consistency, and then I just top it with that grilled zucchini that I made. I've also got the blackened chicken that I was cooking in the air fryer, so I used some kitchen scissors and chopped that up, and that is this meal. The chicken is 0 points on Weight Watchers as well as the zucchini, so all I have to track is the pasta and then the cheeses that I used for the sauce. Okay, so that wraps up my healthy dinner recipes for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this and found it helpful. Maybe got some new inspiration for meal ideas or just a reminder of something you used to like and haven't had in a while. I know that editing this video definitely helped me with that, and I've got some new inspiration for ideas in the kitchen. But I hope this is helpful. When it comes to my weight loss journey, I really do like to keep things very simple. If you guys don't have my cookbook, or if you do have my cookbook, you know, the recipes I really try to keep limited with the amount of ingredients I use or just the types of ingredients. I like to keep it really basic, simple things that you have on hand that are low point but still really flavorful and filling. Let me know what you guys think of this video. If you like this format, I can definitely do more. I've got a bunch of breakfasts and lunches from all my what I eat in a day, so I could do something similar with those as well. But let me know what you guys think. I appreciate your guys' support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.